get underway. We have a full program, and I welcome you all to the special day today, which is the World Health Organization's World Hand Hygiene Day. And so in honor of this day, we organized a panel of experts to discuss the issue of hand hygiene and how you can stay healthier in a germ-filled world, surviving in a germ-filled world. I will take a couple of minutes to introduce the panelists, and then I will give you an introduction to the topic, and the panel will continue with a discussion of the issue from their unique perspectives as experts in particular areas of the field, and then we will have time for questions and answers from the audience. So I'm Professor Miryam Wahrman from the Department of Biology. I have an interest in hand hygiene as a biologist, but also as a human being, because I do want to stay healthy, and I do appreciate that we are assaulted by and exposed to risks from various types of germs and microorganisms. And so that's how I got interested in this topic. And I recently wrote a book called The Handbook, Surviving in a Germ-Filled World. And so this book just came out this week in honor of Hand Hygiene Day. And so that's how this all came to be. And the timing of it is that today is World Hand Hygiene Day. So I also welcome the illustrious panelists of experts, prominent people in the field, Professor Corey Basch, my colleague at William Paterson University, an associate professor of public health who has done research with me. We've been collaborating on research. And Professor Persephone Vargas from William Paterson University. And she will be able to give us insight from the healthcare perspective, tremendously important in terms of staying healthy. And we have Araceli Pintle, who is here as a health educator. She is a health educator for the City of Passaic Division of Health, and she is an alumnus of William Paterson University, so we're very proud to welcome her back. And Mark Mora, who is a health inspector, one of the most important people you will meet, because he's the one who goes in and makes sure that the places that you're eating and other places that you patronize are doing things according to code. And so we thank him for all of the things that he's doing for us. And he is a health inspector for the Passaic City Division of Health, and also an alumnus of William Paterson, who we're very proud to welcome back. And unfortunately, Cindy Gennarelli became sick and she's unable to attend. So I said to her, "Didn't you wash your hands?" But at any rate, we are sorry that she was unable to join us. Thank you all for attending. I also want to recognize my assistant, Bernice Zahavi, who came here to assist at the display in the back, and also with the signing in and the signing out for students who have been who are attending for various classes. So I thank you very much for your assistance. So happy World Hand Hygiene Day, or should I say Healthy World Hand Hygiene Day, because that's really what you want to get out of this. Hand washing saves lives. And the World Health Organization studies diseases all over the world, and they decided that this is a compelling reason to dedicate a full day to raise awareness to hand hygiene and hand washing. They launched the global campaign in 2009, and every year there's a different theme, and this year, 2016, the theme is Hand Hygiene Supports Safe Surgical Care. So Professor Vargas, we look forward to hearing about those issues from the hospital perspective. And there happens to be another day in the year that's also dedicated to hand washing, and that's October 15th. So stay tuned, because maybe we'll all be back here to talk about it again. That day is called Global Hand Washing Day, and it was initiated by a totally different group, a consortium of private corporations and some public universities, public groups, academic institutions. And that includes companies like Colgate-Palmolive and Procter & Gamble and Unilever, and you've heard of those companies, right? What do they make? Soap. Okay, they make soap, they make paper towels, but they are interested in promoting health from the perspective of their industries. And also, of course, some of the academic institutions like the London School of Hygiene and SUNY Buffalo. So stay tuned, maybe in the fall we can do this again. And there are many motivations to wash your hands, but a very good one for college students in particular is that there are risks on college campuses. And you have a recent outbreak. It was just announced last week that there were confirmed and probable cases of the mumps, right? Who heard of the mumps? We don't hear about it that often. You've heard about it because you got a vaccine for it. When I was a kid, everybody got the mumps. I had the mumps probably twice. You know, I had the measles. We had all those diseases. Now you're vaccinated, so you can escape the wrath of those diseases. But on campuses, there was an outbreak. That means that vaccines aren't perfect. If vaccines aren't perfect, then what's the first line of defense? Hand washing. You want to be careful about and aware about the germs that are around you and the risks of being exposed to infectious diseases. And so on campuses, besides being aware of your hand washing and hand hygiene, you should also not share utensils and cups and towels and so on, even if they appear healthy, because they may be incubating something. You know, you can appear healthy and then develop a disease a few days later. So we know about risks, and the panelists will talk to you about many of these things in more detail, but I thought I would just throw up a list of various things that you touch all the time and make you think about what it means to be touching things that other people are touching. So of course, sinks in the restrooms and doorknobs and handrails and the bunch of munchies that you see at parties, you know, the peanuts and the potato chips. Lots of hands have been there. It should make you think. And of course, money, and we'll talk a little bit about money with Dr. Basch's presentation, and other surfaces that you're exposed to. So you can absorb a list like this and begin to think about what you're doing in the world of the germ-filled world. So a little history. Very little, because there's a huge history. I mean, in the book that I wrote, I covered a lot of the history, but I thought I would pick out a couple of the superstars in science who discovered what we know today, which is you should wash your hands because of germs, because germs cause disease. So Leeuwenhoek was one of the pioneers, and he came up with the very first microscopes. And you see here a picture of Leeuwenhoek himself and a very ancient, right, one of the original microscopes, and some of the drawings that he made of the microbes, the microorganisms. And he was very excited to find that if you look in rainwater or in other fluids, you find living creatures. So he said, come here, hurry. These little animals are in the rainwater. They swim, they play around. They're 1,000 times smaller than any creatures we can see with our eyes alone. Look, see what I have discovered. And based on that, we have a whole science of microbiology, and we have learned an awful lot about what microbes can do to us. And another pioneer, Ignaz Semmelweis, who lived in the 19th century, was one of the first to discover that in hospital settings, you need to wash your hands before you treat patients. There was a tremendous problem with healthy women who delivered babies contracting childbed fever and then dying, which is terribly tragic. And this was rampant in those hospitals, to the point where the women didn't even want to go to the hospital. They were much better off delivering in the street rather than in the hospital. And so he proposed that the doctors who were doing autopsies on dead bodies of people who had passed away from infectious diseases, they would then run from autopsies to delivering babies without washing hands. He proposed sanitizing the hands, and it reduced the infection rate dramatically. But he was met with a lot of resistance, because when you try to change something, anything in an institution in particular, you are going to make some enemies. And that is his story. His own personal story was that his discoveries were met with great resistance, and eventually they prevailed, because they made the link between germs and disease. And they said, oh yes, he was right all along. But nowadays, we still have inadequate hand washing among hospital staff, and that still leads to unnecessary complications and deaths even today. And that's why we're here today, because it's still a problem. Okay? Even though we know so much, there's a disconnect between what we are supposed to be doing and what we are actually doing. Now, I teach a course in bioethics, and I think about bioethics issues all the time. The first bioethics principle is first do no harm, and this is what we would wish in a hospital. And one study showed that, unfortunately, in this Tennessee hospital, hand washing was at 54% in intensive care units. Not a very good record. But we can improve that with interventions and training and bring it up. Okay? And in this study, they brought it up to 81%, which sounds really great, right? But college students, you know 81% is a B. What do we want to have? An A. You bet. When it comes to health, you want to have an A. So we have a challenge in front of us, and we have a panel of people who will tell us how we're going to address that challenge. So just as a quick biology review, there are various categories, kingdoms, and groups of microbes that can make us sick. Many of the viruses, fungi, bacteria, and protists are harmless, but some of them cause disease. Those are the pathogenic ones. We do study individual microbes that cause specific diseases, but in the 21st century we discovered that the community of microbes that we live in may be very important. That community is called the microbiome, and we can define communities based on where we're looking. So we have a hand microbiome, all the germs on your hand. Everybody's got a different group of germs on their hands, according to research. There's an office microbiome. There's even a belly button microbiome, and there's a research study that has looked into that. And there's home microbiomes, subway microbiomes, and most important in terms of real health issues, the hospital microbiome. What germs are there in your hospital room, in the operating room, in the clinics? Here are a few examples of microbes from the hand. Staphylococcus epidermidis is benign, harmless. Okay, it's ubiquitous. We all have it. Staph aureus is around us, and sometimes it makes us sick. It can cause food poisoning, toxic shock syndrome, necrotizing fasciitis, which is the flesh-eating disease, which should make you go, ooh, right? Flesh-eating, right? Ooh, very bad. And Streptococcus pyogenes, which Jim Henson, the Muppet creator, he died from that disease. And it's also the microorganism that was responsible for childbed fever from the days of Semmelweis. So you can see these bugs, these germs, they get around, right? And they hang out. They're with us over the long course of history. And this is my little baby grandson's hand. Aww, aww. So who's washing hands and who is failing to wash? Think about it. Are you a hand washer? Okay, and now we ask people. If you ask them, do you wash your hands after using a public restroom, 96% say, yeah, sure. But if you watch them, look at what we found. Canadians are telling the truth. Okay, no surprise, right? They're really nice up there. In Miami, there's a disconnect already, 81%. In Chicago's O'Hare, 73%. And our very own local airport, JFK, 70% of people are washing their hands after using the public restroom. That means about a third of them are not. Think about that, okay? Keep that in mind. College students, hey guys, are you washing your hands? Well, some of you are. Here's after defecation and after urination. Okay, pretty graphic stuff, right? So you're not getting A's. Okay, you're not getting. Some of you are, but some of you are not getting A's in this particular test. So we can talk a little bit about the things that we touch, the so-called fomites, because those surfaces carry microbes. So jewelry and watches, right? Stethoscopes that you see in the hospitals, the clinics. Cell phones. Your cell phone is going to carry all of your germs because it's your most personal object. The first thing you touch in the morning, for many of you, right? You wake up, oh, I have to see messages, right? Text. The last thing you touch at night, and some people bring it into the bathroom with them. Okay? Shh, don't tell anybody. But then they take it and they put it on their dining room table when they eat next to it. So think about that. Of course, money, we're going to talk about money, the gloves that you're supposed to wear to protect yourself, and food itself can carry germs, and that can bring you to foodborne illness as well. In our lab, we did research with Professor Basch, but we have another project just on fabrics. We found that if you contaminate different fabrics with bacteria like E. coli, it transfers very readily from one fabric to another. So if you contaminated your clothing, you're carrying around germs, and you go home with it, you can bring home those germs on your clothing. Now, we tested different fabrics, and we found something very surprising. One fabric stood out amongst all the other, something called microfiber. And this one that we tested was the kind that they use for the stain-resistant tablecloths. And guess what? E. coli doesn't stick to it. Okay? It repels stains and it repels E. coli, which is kind of nice to know. That means that we should all be dressing in microfiber. Not so comfortable because it doesn't absorb body moisture either. Here's just one experiment where we see transfer from silk to silk and polyester to polyester and cotton to cotton and so on. But microfiber, this one is clean. No transfer at all. This is bacteria. This is totally clean. It doesn't transfer. Okay? It doesn't always happen, but and if you look in the microscope, you see lots of bacteria around the wool and the silk and the polyester and the scrubs, which you wear in the clinic. But microfiber, very clean. So that was a little study that we did that we found some interesting things. And now solutions, and then we're going to go on to the panel. I'm not going to tell you all the solutions. I just put this up here to show you that we have different types of things we can do with children to entertain them. There's a 7-foot hand costume you can rent to have at parties. Okay, at your next birthday party, you want Henry the Hand to entertain your guests. We can also use the idea of disgust to turn people off to germs. Humiliation and shame work. Okay, you know that works with children, right? Hey, don't do that, right? Should be embarrassed. Legislation and regulations. We have 2 experts to talk to us about those. And of course, we have various games like the board game Pandemic, which is kind of fun if you like germs. And we can teach. And that we have our health educator here for that. So here's the cover of the handbook. I just want to point out that there is a book display in the back, and there's a special reduced rate if you're interested later on. You can pick up a copy, and I'd be happy to sign it for you. So I am very happy now to introduce Professor Corey Basch, who will be talking about hand hygiene and food vendors. And thank you.
Thank you, and thank you for coming, especially to my research students who can't possibly bear to hear me speak any more about research and yet still found their way here today. I'm just going to talk very briefly about 2 studies that I conducted in New York City that dealt with hand hygiene and food vendors. So we're all familiar with food vendors, especially throughout New York City. There are about 5,000 mobile food vendors situated throughout the entire city, and that's how many permits are given. We don't know how many might be operating without a permit. We hope there aren't any of those going on. But yet there was very little known when I searched in the literature about the extent to which these food vendors are practicing safe hand hygiene techniques or even changing their gloves. As someone who lives in New York City, it's something that's very easy to observe, especially if you have the time to stand there and watch, that most people show up to these food carts just for a minute, just to get the one thing that they were looking for, and then they leave. But if you stand there for a while, what you come to find is that oftentimes the food vendors are wearing gloves, but they're not changing them. So they're the same gloves they're touching money with and then touching food, and this just goes on and on. And so when we looked, we found this was not published in the literature anywhere, so we set out to do exactly that. So we were trying to document how often food workers change their gloves after exchanging money and then touching food, and we did this with direct observation. So the first study took place in the summer of 2014, and we had 2 researchers, they were public health students from here at William Paterson, observing food carts throughout 10 different areas of New York City. It was an onerous task. They observed 100 carts, so that was 100 hours of observation throughout throughout all different zones of the city. We wanted to make sure that we weren't just sort of stereotyping one specific area of the city, so we dispersed throughout the entire city, and I should mention that we were just in the borough of Manhattan. What we ended up finding is that 56.9% of the 1,804 money exchanges, the food vendors did not change their gloves. So that's a pretty high rate of non-glove changing behavior. So, and this is, I should mention again, that they were touching money and then touching the food, and in this whole time they have the exact same gloves on. So someone might ask, well, do you think their behavior might have been influenced by you standing there observing them with clipboards? And I would have hoped that maybe that would set off something in their mind to actually change their gloves, but we still saw this alarmingly high rate. Another anecdote that we can mention is that we did see carts pack up and leave, which we still don't know why that happened. It's just something that was interesting to mention, that upon being observed, the cart left the premises altogether. So that was just something that's interesting, that's not noted as to why that type of thing would happen. And this was really happening throughout all meals of the day, all times that we observed them. So this led to the second study, which was a fantastic study and sort of conducted quickly but very efficiently, where we worked with Dr. Wahrman in the bio lab, and what we were trying to do is not only determine the rate of glove changing with these mobile food vendors after their monetary transactions, but we wanted to look at the presence of bacterial contamination on the samples of dollar bills that we obtained from the vendors. So what would happen is, the research assistants that worked on this project would observe the vendor for their behavior for an hour and then make a purchase, and using sterile gloves collect the change and put them into tubes that we had already prepared to bring back to the lab. And again, in Manhattan, almost anything goes, and so we got very little questioning about what on earth we were doing, why we were making purchase with sterile gloves on, and so it was great. We were able to actually conduct the experiment this way. All of the food carts in this particular study were situated outside of the largest hospitals in Manhattan, and we just thought this was an interesting sample because we know people inside the hospital are immunocompromised, and workers would be maybe getting this food, or families, it was around the hospital. So that was just sort of our thinking on that. During 495 monetary transactions, there were only 7 glove changes in this study. So, I mean, that's incredibly low. And 11 out of 34 food workers had no gloves on at all. And Mark, I know you can't even handle this right now as an inspector, that this is what's going on. So this is just showing the summary of the data by location. It was pretty much a ubiquitous thing going on. I know everyone sort of wanted us to single out the one worst hospital, which that's not the point. It's just saying that it's rampant, and these are very large hospitals serving the community, so it's just something that's important to think about. 19 of the $25 $1 bills that we collected had 400 to 42,000 total bacteria colony forming units, and Miryam can speak more to the interpretation of this. And of these 19 samples, we selected 13 and tested for the presence of coliform bacteria, which was found on 10 out of those 13 samples. So there was, we did see this going on in these dollar bills. So this is, here they are in the sterile tubes, all collected and numbered, and we know which hospitals these were collected outside of, but we're not telling. And then each of these dishes signifies one of the different hospitals, and you can see that some are really pretty bad offenders here. And so my take-home message from all of this is just that with observation, you can get a sense of who you're purchasing food from, but the larger picture here is that the food vendor, there is a code in place that really stipulates that they should be changing their gloves after all of these monetary transactions. So that's not being enforced, and that's a problem. And it's expensive to change gloves. No one has really reached out to food vendors and asked them what's going on, why are you not changing gloves? One thing we could speculate is that it's expensive to buy gloves. If you were to change them after every single transaction, you're gonna rack up quite a bill. So even steps like using hand sanitizer on the gloves has been shown to be effective. So there are measures that you could take to decrease contamination that way. And that's all I have, but we'll take questions after, and I'll turn it over to Dr. Vargas. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Today I'm tasked with briefly discussing hand hygiene among healthcare workers. In 2009, the World Health Organization actually started this program called Save Lives, Clean Your Hands, to promote hand hygiene among healthcare workers. Cleaning hands really does save lives, and in the United States alone, over 700,000 hospital-acquired infections occur. So these are infections that occur in the hospital, not patients coming in because of an infection. And this leads to 75,000 deaths. It also means that there's $4.5 billion annually spent towards these infections. So improper hand hygiene by healthcare workers is responsible for about 40% of these hospital-acquired infections. So that's very, very significant. Clean hands are the single most important factor in preventing the spread of pathogens and antibiotic resistance in the healthcare settings. So healthcare workers know that hand hygiene, washing hands, is very important in spreading infection, right? And yet, as mentioned earlier, currently the practice is about 40% compliance. So it varies from institutions. Different institutions have their own percentage of compliance, and it varies from different types of units. So, for example, Miryam mentioned earlier that the critical care unit had about a 50% compliance. So critical care units usually have a better compliance as compared to the regular floors. And it also varies between healthcare providers. So nurses actually have one of the highest compliance for hand hygiene, usually about 60%, which is still low if you think about it. And if you provide intervention, it might go up to about 80%, but the average is still 60%. Physicians and PCAs usually are about 40%. So despite the knowledge that hand hygiene prevents infection and saves lives, why is there such a low adherence or compliance among healthcare workers? So the top 5 reasons that have been provided are there. First is that it's not a problem. They don't think that they don't do hand hygiene. They feel and they think that they're actually compliant and that they do hand hygiene. But the fact is, when studies are done, and it's difficult to do these studies because it's by observation, and there's usually what they call like the Hawthorne effect, wherein if you're observed, you tend to do better, and yet we still have a 40% compliance rate. So institutions are not aware, or healthcare workers are not aware that they're actually not doing hand hygiene when they're supposed to. Too busy or no time. So you see, some of you are exposed to people in the hospital, but nurses are always running around very busy, and they don't have time in between patients to do hand hygiene. But the fact is, alcohol-based drops, which I'll go over in a couple of minutes, actually only take about 15 seconds to do. It takes about 2 seconds to get the alcohol-based drop and 15 seconds to do it. And you could even do it while you're walking. So it doesn't take that much time. And the full hand washing can only take about 45 seconds to about a minute. So it really does not take that much time. Inconvenience, either the location of the sink is too far, or sometimes lack of soap and water is also a reason. I think the hospitals have gotten better with providing each room with their own sink, soap and water and towels, and also around the nursing units. And then lastly, but a very good excuse, is that it irritates their hands and it makes their hands really dry. So we have to really think about taking care of the hands of those who provide care. So studies have actually shown that the alcohol-based drugs, because they know that this is one of the reasons, have changed their formula so that it is actually less irritating and less drying compared to soap and water. So when should healthcare providers or healthcare workers wash their hands or do hand hygiene? So one is before touching a patient, second, before any procedure, third, after exposure to body fluids, fourth is after touching a patient, and five is after touching the patient surroundings. So not just the patient, but the surroundings, so anything in the room. So the best practice is really when you go in the room, you do hand hygiene. When you leave the room, you also do hand hygiene. So a lot of healthcare workers don't really know that. They might know that they should do hand hygiene after, but not necessarily before. So the difference between hand washing or using the hand rub. So hand washing uses soap and water, and there are 3 instances when it should be done in the healthcare facility. First, when you look at your hands and it looks dirty, it looks soiled, it's been exposed, you should wash your hands with soap and water. And I think you will go over the proper hand washing techniques. Definitely, as mentioned earlier, after you use the bathroom, no excuses. And then the third one is if you're exposed to infectious pathogens. Again, some were discussed earlier. If you have a patient who has an infectious disease, MRSA, C. diff, you should certainly wash your hands. Those cases. The rest of the time, the preferred means of routine hand hygiene is actually using the alcohol-based hand rub. So other than those 3 instances, you can use the alcohol-based hand rub. And that's when nurses or other healthcare workers are not very knowledgeable about that fact, and they think that, oh, I have to go to the sink, I have to do this. But they could certainly just use the alcohol-based hand rub, and it takes about 15 seconds to do, and less irritating than soap and water. So this year, the 2016 World Health Organization is actually focusing on safe surgical care among the healthcare workers. So this is their poster, See Your Hands, Hand Hygiene Supports Safe Surgical Care. So just a brief overview of the program. There's about 300 million who undergo procedures yearly in the United States. About 31% can develop a hospital-acquired infection. And of course, this causes a lot more complications to the patients. Patient becomes sick. And then their length of stay in the hospital becomes longer by 3 to 20 days. This, again, translates to obviously increased in healthcare costs. So again, very simple and very practical. Hand hygiene can cut down the infections in the hospital. So just lastly, for all the healthcare workers, make a healthy difference. Wash your hands with either soap and water or the hand sanitizer. And then not just for the healthcare workers, but for the patients and for the family, who visits, you should certainly encourage them to do hand hygiene as well. And I know we're providing some hand sanitizers, so you could start by doing that now and doing the hand hygiene on yourself. Start practicing yourself to help save lives and encourage health, promote health. Thank you.
And next up, but before I introduce our next speaker, I just want to take a moment to thank those groups on campus who were co-sponsors of the event. The William Paterson University Departments of Biology, Nursing, Public Health, Elementary and Early Childhood Education, the Public Health Club, the Bioethics Club, I think there are some members here of these clubs, and the Counseling, Health, and Wellness Center provided us with the samples of the alcohol-based hand rub, and you are welcome as you exit later on to please take one of the little bottles. So now I'm very happy to introduce Araceli Pintle, who is our next speaker.
All right, so hello everyone. As Dr. Wahrman mentioned earlier, I am originally from William Paterson, so it's very nice to see professors that I used to have class with, like Dr. Kernan. I actually do have some familiar faces because I had interns with me. So some of them are here today, so I welcome you. Thank you for coming. But health education is something that I deal with every day. As a health educator, I have to obviously be within the community, try to partner and collaborate with many agencies. So basically, I'm the face of the health department when I do many of our outreach programs or events. And just so you know, if you're interested in health education, if you do want to become a health educator, and if you do want to work in a health department, you do need to be CHEST certified. So I just have that information here. I had to take the NCHEC exam, and every 5 years I have to make sure that I do my renewal, so I have to keep up with my credits every 5 years. And as you can see here, it's a total of 75 credits. So what do I do as a health educator? I mentioned some. I have to plan, I have to develop, I have to create programs. I have to evaluate these programs to see if they're appropriate for the populations that I'm working with. In addition to that, I have to create promotion materials, educational materials, assist our health officer when it comes to management of certain grants. I also have to work, once again, with partners in cases if there are emergent health issues. An example of that might be to Ebola. I know you guys have heard about Zika, the Zika virus, so we have to definitely keep up to date, be well informed, and if necessary, create programs that would assist people in not only awareness, but maybe even surveillance if it comes to that. So that's some of the things that I have to do. Obviously, there's a lot more. That's why I have the et cetera, because the list is never ending. But when we're talking about hand washing, usually as a health educator, I try to go more into the school, so I try to start as early as possible. So I start with pre-K, kindergarten. I also speak with the parents, so I do attend to many of the PTA meetings in over 20 schools that we have in our city. Food handlers courses are also something that I assist Mark Moore with. He's our health inspector. And basically we try to work with them, and I'm pretty sure Mark will touch a little bit more about that, so I won't say much. For the employees at our city, I am responsible for informing them how to protect themselves from blood exposures. As you know, blood and fluids that we contain do have bloodborne pathogens such as HIV, hepatitis B, hepatitis C. So I do tend to do a lot of training with our police department, our fire department, our EMS department, and I just try to, once again, inform them about the importance of hand washing and other methods to protect themselves from these exposures. And then, of course, we have flu season. Hand washing is very important during flu season, which starts as early as September and ends as late as May. So we're still in flu season. So I do a lot of that education. So from my experience, I tend to see that hands-on activities tend to be more, people tend to learn more that way, or to have visuals as well. So I actually do have with me our Germ Glow equipment here, and I'm actually gonna demonstrate this in front of you. So I'm actually gonna request for some volunteers. I'll just ask for 2. And I'm gonna explain to you step by step what I do when I speak with the children or when I speak with the parents. And trust me, when you're dealing with children, their reactions are just they're just funny. Some are scared and petrified at the fact that they have germs in their hands, but I'll show you how I would be working with that.
I'll just explain that we would typically ask students, but because of the video recording, we need to have a release for anyone who's on camera. So we're going to have the panelists participate in this part of the demonstration. So who
All right,
wants
so
to?
I have 3 items here with me. I have
Okay,
our
I'm willing
Germ-Filled
to try.
lotion. I have our germ bag. So as you can see, it has the actual germs, so you can, scare the kids. And then you have the UV light. So let me get the UV light.
Okay.
And this UV light is actually, as I said, explained to the kids, it's our special light. It's our powerful light that could show you the germs. And so what I tend to do is I have, so this is my volunteer. I'm going to put some of the germ glue onto the hands. And I need you to rub it front of the hands, back of the hands, in between the fingers. And I'll do the same here. Just enough. If you need more, let me know. Good. So, obviously the germ bag is full of germs, so they're going to touch this, they're going to pat it down, and then we're going to see how many germs they have onto those hands. Just pat it down. There you go.
Puffing out.
So is anybody familiar with the germ glow demonstration? Have they done this before? No. Okay, so it's really fun. Pat it down. Get all those germs into your hands, in between, under the fingers. All right, so that's the germ bag. And now we have the demonstration of the UV light. So with the UV light, we should be able to see the germs that they have acquired because of the help of the germ glow. All right.
So you want to bring them out front,
Bring
maybe?
them out.
I don't know. Do we need to turn off some lights?
Maybe we could dim it a little bit. That would be helpful.
What do you think? Well, we can try. I just
Let's
want to
see.
make sure it goes back on.
All right, so you can actually put your hands down. And we should be able to see some of those germs onto Mark's hands. You could actually see there's like some white spots, some white little accumulation here, and that's what I will tell the children, that's the germs. They're invisible to your naked eye. You don't see them day to day, but they are present, and that's why hand washing is important. So I'll do the same here to Professor Vargas. And we're going to try to see if we have any accumulation of germs. And as you can see under the nails, there's definitely some. On the palms as well. So you can see the accumulation. Once again, you can see it is all the way up here. So this is just like a very helpful tool when we do health education with parents and with children. So that's the demonstration. So what I'm going to do now, I'm going to have them go wash their hands. In the meantime, I'm going to play a little video for you guys. So you got open up, and then when they come back, we're going to do the same test again.
Good morning, class. Now we're going to learn about proper hand hygiene to prevent blah 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 possibility of hospital-acquired infections.
I thought germs were only true in scary tales, infecting someone else but never me. Bugs were out to get me, that's the way it seemed. Pseudomonas haunted all my dreams. And then I washed my hands, now I'm a believer, not a strand of doubt in my mind. Wash your hands, ooh, I'm a believer, not a germ weaver if I tried. Thought infection was more or less a given thing. The more I washed, the less I gave, oh yeah. You'll get used to washing. Ain't that big a pain? So try it. Soap and water gets rid of the infection chain. And then I wash my hands. Now I'm a believer, not a strand, a fake on my skin. I'm so clean, ooh, I'm a believer. Stop the transfer and you win. Infecting someone else, but never me. Staff was out to get me. E. coli, that's the way it seemed. E. coli, rose contagion haunted all my dreams. And then I wash my hands.
So I hope you're all believers. So we have our volunteers back, and we're going to do the demo again to see who washed their hands properly. I'm going to start with Dr. Vargas here. So she shouldn't have any of the white speckles anywhere on these hands. And as you can see, she's actually pretty clean. And we'll start here on the other hand. Same thing, nothing. So she did clean her hands properly, even on the bag. So she did really good. Now we're going to check Mark, our health inspector. Let's see how well he cleaned his hands. So Mark didn't clean his hands.
I swear I did.
Yeah. So you can see there's a lot of the white of those specklings right there on the back of the palms as well. So
Like a sandwich.
Mark definitely needs to work on that hand washing. So that's basically what we would do as a health educator. I would go out to these places, show the visuals, have them practice the hand washing techniques, and of course they're going to see if they didn't wash their hands properly, they have to practice on their hand washing, especially if they're younger children. It's a fun activity. So as we have seen here, here we go. There are challenges. So obviously one of the major challenges that we find, and I'm pretty sure Mark could agree with me, changing behavior is definitely an issue for us, especially if there are old habits. Old habits or inherited habits are very difficult to break. Other issues that we find are issues of cultural beliefs or issues of religious beliefs. There are certain religions that prohibit the use of soap or the use of hand sanitizer, so this is, we would have to work around that, like figure out ways on how we could improve hand washing if that is the case. And then overcoming misconceptions or improper hand washing procedures or improper hand sanitizing procedures. So some people actually do have the hand sanitizers, they rub it on, and then because their hands are still wet, they're kind of like with the hand washing, they pat it on their, thighs. So that's improper hand washing or hand sanitizer use. So those are our current challenges, not only for hand washing, but I think for many other health issues. Changing behaviors and misconceptions are definitely something that we have to deal with every day. So that's health education.
Okay, so our next speaker, Mark Mara, the health inspector who keeps us healthy as well. And I think you have a video also, so I think that's why everybody moved, is because of the video. So we're moving the panelists over here so that you can see the video better. But we're going to be back after Mark speaks because you're going to have your questions and answers. So, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. Again, my name is Mark Wahrman, Inspector with the City Passaic Health Department. Also an alumnus from here, William Paterson University, class of 2007. And I've basically been with the city of Passaic ever since. I was lucky enough to be hired by my internship site, and they've been good to me, and it's been a pleasure to be there since then. Becoming an inspector, a good place to start is right here, William Paterson University. Their public health program is very good. It's heavily science-based, which would give you your 32 required credits in order to take the health inspector's course. It's a 7-week course held at Rutgers University. There is a 200-hour internship that follows that course. There is an alternate route, which if you happen to meet some of the criteria and you already work with a health department in a related field, you can apply to take the state exam. If you qualify to take the exam, you sit for the exam. If you pass, you get your license to be a health inspector. Yes, you do require a license to do this job. There is yearly education as well, like Araceli mentioned. It's 15 credits per year that you have to maintain. What do we do? Our main job function is to enforce the laws that are found in Chapter 824. This is the state regulation that regulates all different types of food establishments. So this doesn't only include your restaurants, but it does cover mobile food establishments. It covers your grocery stores, your daycare centers. Any facility that provides food for the public falls under this regulation. In addition to enforcing those laws, we make sure that all these types of establishments are built according to code. So we'll review all the plans, we'll investigate complaints that might come in for the public related to the food establishment. So if you see someone making your sandwich without gloves, you can call your local health department, and their inspector will go out and investigate that complaint. And many other duties, including investigations of blood lead levels, but that would be an entirely different seminar. When it comes to hand washing, don't let my poor job of washing my hands deter you or sway you from any particular opinions. I do take hand washing seriously as an inspector. As was mentioned before, hand washing is your first line of defense against many different bacterial infections or viral infections and the transmission of those bacteria. So these are all things that would be found in that Chapter 824 from the state of what are the requirements for hand washing. So hands have to be kept clean. The hand sink is the only location where it is approved to wash your hands. In a restaurant, you might have several different sinks. You may have a service sink, food prep sink, 3-compartment sink, and your hand sink. The only sink that you're allowed to wash your hands in is at the hand sink. And that's to prevent any contamination thereafter from having washed your hands. Hand sinks are required in all food prep areas. Hand sinks should be provided with hot water. Under the state code, the hot water definition is anywhere from 90 degrees to 110 degrees. Hand sinks have to be supplied with hand soap and some type of hand drying device. You can't wash your hands with water alone, so you have to have hand soap. And the only approved methods under the state codes of a hand drying device is paper towels or an air dryer. There's no common towels allowed. If we, like our demonstration, you have an employee that does a great job of washing their hands, uses that common towel, and a poor employee that washes their hands poorly and uses that common towel, that towel becomes a fomite and will transfer all the bacteria and viruses that I had on my hands from doing a poor washing of my hands onto the towel and then onto the next food worker. So that's why common towels are not allowed. Obviously you have paper towels, so those paper towels have to go somewhere. The floor is not a good place for them. You need a trash can. Hand washing sign should be posted at the hand sink. And the main statement that should be on that hand wash sign is employees must wash their hands before returning to work. Maybe you've seen that somewhere on your outings out at a restaurant. You should see them posted at the hand sinks. Even in the restrooms where the customers access the restrooms, those signs should be posted. And the hand sink should be accessible at all times. You can't wash your hands if the hand sink basin is obstructed with kitchen utensils or plates or pots and pans and any other nonsense that we tend to see in the basin sinks. They should be free and clear, free of obstruction, and not blocked. The state code provides a step-by-step process of how food handlers are supposed to be washing their hands. Straightforward, nothing of any surprises because it should be common sense, but you'd be surprised some of the things that, as an inspector, you end up seeing out in the field. So you should wet your hands, use a liquid-based hand soap, lather and rub for at least 15 seconds. Make sure you focus on your palms, the top of your hands, up to as far as your elbows if necessary. Focus underneath the fingernails, and so on and so forth. Rinse, air dry or towel dry, and then shut off the faucet. Because obviously your hands were dirty when you touched the faucet to begin with. So if you did a good job of washing your hands, you don't want to touch the dirty faucet. And then discard the paper towel in that way. So like I had mentioned before, it's important to follow the exact hand washing procedures, and I have a little video that will explain why.
Some people use the full soap and water for washing their hands. Some people, they just get their hands wet before drying them off. Why don't we test both of those and see which is the proper worst case scenario for testing hand towel versus dryer?
Okay, that works.
So how do people wash their hands? Well, to my way of thinking, there are 3 things people do in a restroom regarding washing their hands. The first is they pretend to wash their hands. The second thing people do is get their hands wet, but use no soap. The third thing people do, and the thing we all know you should do, is wash their hands with soap. So first things first, Jamie and I are gonna wash our hands using each of those techniques and compare the bacterial loads to see if Jamie is in fact right. Does washing your hands in soap and water leave them completely clean?
And first to go is Adam, who after each cleaning custom, hands over to the Heinemann.
I'm swabbing Adam's hands with a soy-based growth medium. So if there's any bacteria on his hands, I'm gonna find it.
Once Jamie's also swabbed for science, it's time for some germination.
Okay, Adam first. Process is pretty simple. We've collected our samples, we've spread them evenly across soy agar in a petri dish, and we've put them in an incubator. We're gonna let them sit there overnight. We'll come in the morning and see what we've got.
And sure enough, 24 hours later,
Let's see what kind of surprise we have.
All right, well, the soap wash,
Nada.
frickin' nothing.
yep, the soap plate's great, which cannot be said of the water wash.
How come your bacteria are bigger than mine?
Sometimes that's just the way it works.
And as for the no wash,
Whoa, gross.
It's a nice little short video. I'm sure everyone's watched Mythbusters before. But it brings the point straight away that washing your hands with soap and water is the best method of removing not only soils that you might have picked up, but also bacteria and viruses that may have been on your hands. And yes, as an inspector, we do see all 3 methods used in the kitchens. So some of the challenges that we face. The biggest challenge, which in your study you have seen, is that when I am in the facility, it's just a snapshot of what's actually going on at the restaurant. So as I walk in, everyone immediately grabs their gloves. They may not need gloves on their hands, but everyone grabs gloves, and they're all putting on gloves. People are rushing here and there to try to wash their hands. But again, it's just a snapshot, so it only gives me an idea of what's going on for the moment that I'm there. So you get a lot of on-the-spot compliance. You'll see people, they go, wait, the inspector is here, I gotta go wash my hands, I just changed task. But we don't really understand whether or not that actually happens when we're not there. The likelihood is very much so that it's not happening. Another challenge is proper glove use. As you also saw, most people, or most food handlers I should say, look at gloves as a way of protecting their hands. All right, they don't want to get their hands dirty, so I'm going to put on a pair of gloves, and I'm going to start my shift at 8 a.m. My shift ends at 4 p.m., and those same gloves are the gloves I put on and take off at the end of my shift. And that's not proper glove use. Proper glove use is intended to be a barrier from the food handler onto the food. They're supposed to protect the food, not individuals' gloves. So we see a lot of things out there where the food handler will prepare the sandwich, grab cash, go wash equipment, and sometimes even go to the extent of going to the hand sink with their gloved hands and washing their gloves, not necessarily their hands. And that's improper glove use. Another challenge that we have is hand sanitizer use. Under the state regulations, it is an acceptable alternative, but it may kill many of the viruses and bacteria that is on your hands, but it's not a end-all to everything. For instance, if you're out in the customer area and mopping the floor or washing some equipment in the 3-compartment sink, you may get some chemical residue on your hands. The hand sanitizer isn't going to do anything for those chemicals, and that chemical can transfer onto the public's food, and that is another means of a potential for foodborne illness. So we tend to enforce more the hand washing than the hand sanitizer use, but it's out there, and people hear a lot of good things about the hand sanitizer use, so they believe in the kitchen they can also do the same thing, and we try to shy away from that. And that's basically all I have. That's our hand washing sign that we have all the food establishments post up in their restaurants.
To answer some questions, and while we're getting into position for that, I'm going to play you a little song, and that way, okay, this should inspire you a little bit more. It's very catchy. It's one of those like earworms. You're going to be humming it all day. Notice there's a symbol. It's a symbol, actual symbol for hand washing. It's only a few more seconds.
Hand washing saves lives.
Okay, so how about some questions now?
Is it true if you use hand sanitizer too much, it can like not be as effective anymore?
Okay, so you're asking about the biology of the hand sanitizer?
Yeah, I heard that if you use it too much.
You get like an immunity to it.
Okay, that's better. Here are all the, in fact, I'll do a scale. Okay, so hand sanitizer, which is alcohol-based, doesn't change the bacteria. It won't make them antibiotic resistant the way antibiotic drugs do. So there is very little risk that it's going to change the bacterial culture and make it into a bigger threat. It's pretty effective. In the hospital, it's not 100% effective. There are some microbes. Do you want to talk about that in terms of the hand sanitizer?
Well, yeah, the usage of the alcohol hand rubs are preferred in certain instances, which I mentioned earlier. But if you do soil your hands with body fluids or blood, obviously that won't be sufficient to sanitize your hands. You need to hand wash.
Other questions, please?
My question is for the inspector, Mr. Mark. I would like to know if, when you're going to these places, do you have a special kit? Are you checking their hands that's making them come into compliance, like on the spot? Is that happening?
We don't check their hands per se, but we just check their procedures and ensuring there's certain points when you're supposed to be washing your hands. So when you enter the kitchen, when you enter the food prep area, after you've taken out the trash, if you had something to eat or drink, all those instances are times that you should be washing your hands. And transitioning from raw food products to cooked food products. So we're just basically sort of stepping back, observing, and making sure that they're doing all of those things.
Thank you.
No problem.
Question in the back there?
When it comes to CNAs and RNs that work in hospitals and they have to wash their hands like within the 5 steps that you stated of previous presentation, does it do more harm than good in terms of like damaging your hand with the constant alcohol being on your hands?
Yeah, that was a concern and still something that nurses and CNAs think about. But like I said, they did a study with the newer version of the hand rubs, the alcohol hand rubs, and they have whatever it is that they added to it to be a little bit more gentler. It's not as irritating anymore to the skin. The newer ones are not. So they're actually better.
I have a question. Oh, of course, an antibacterial soap versus like an all-natural vegan soap. Which one would you guys prefer?
There has been a controversy about the antibacterial soaps, especially the chemicals that they're putting into antibacterial soaps. They did find that just regular soap, just traditional soap, is effective enough. It's very effective, and the antibacterials don't add much of anything. In fact, because a chemical like triclosan has been suspected to be linked to cancer, they're removing it now from a lot of products. But we've been exposed to a lot of these chemicals. In fact, they're finding it in our rivers and streams and in bodily fluids. So that's been a big controversy. It's a very good question. And really regular soap, natural soap, should do what's supposed to be done, which is really washing off the germs. You're not really killing all the germs, but you're washing them away into the sink.
In a healthcare setting, say like it's super busy and you may not have time to wash your hands properly and you double glove. Is it still super necessary to just be able to use the alcohol glove, or do you still need to find the time to wash your hands?
If you're gloving and you're not, it's not either an infectious disease or you're not exposed to body fluid or blood, then you can use the alcohol-based. But you still need to do hand hygiene even if your hands are gloved. Because I think the misconception is to some, if your hands are gloved, you don't need to do alcohol-based hand rub or hand wash. You still do.
Dr. Basch, is there any, I know that you mentioned before that when your researchers were observing some of the vendors, they just practically left. Did it occur that maybe they thought you might have been the NHD?
Right.
And is there plan to maybe reach out to the NYCHD to ask them to regulate some of the things that go on in the city?
In the city, if you walk around, you see restaurants with a rating on the window, so when there is, you walk by a restaurant and it has a C rating, you skip it and go to the next one. Food carts, unfortunately, have been largely overlooked, I think, to make that space and time for regulating all the restaurants. Where our hope is that, it catches on and they see some of these things are falling through the cracks. So one speculation we had is that it's possible the cart could have been functioning without a permit. In other cases, there were some outliers where they used gloves feverishly. I mean, they were changing after every single, and then you kind of walk by an hour later and they're not. So it's much like Mark mentioned, where it's on the spot compliance. We thought we'd see it affecting our results much more than we did. So that's a really sort of sad commentary on it, that we still saw almost 60% non-compliance with us standing there with a clipboard, not necessarily in the window, but I mean, we were there without a lot of questions.
First and foremost, I just want to say congratulations on your book, Dr. Miryam.
Thank you.
And I just want to say, is there a procedure to how long you should wash your hands? Because I know oftentimes where I go to the bathroom, people want to take like 5 seconds. So I want to know, how long should you just really sit down? Well, not sit down, take your time to wash your hands.
Would you like to?
Do you have it in your?
I had that in my presentation. Under the state regulations, it's at least 15 to 20 seconds. And that's usually what, even with our programming for the public, is what we recommend. So it really doesn't take all that long. it's about the same time to sing happy birthday twice to yourself.
That's what the kids learn.
That's how we use it with the kids, and we have them sit out there and say, you know, happy birthday. And they really like it because they're not seeing it as a task, and they're seeing it as a fun kind of thing to do, but it gets their mind set on the proper duration of time.
Okay, thank you so much.
No problem, you're welcome.
Hi, my question is, where's the fine line between having a young kid that plays around and how often to wash their hands versus the need for them to quote unquote like develop immunity, so letting them play with dirt and rocks, and especially now that it's nice out, like where's that fine line?
Well, we're not going to live in a sterile world even if we wash our hands. And you don't want to drive the kids crazy so that they rebel either. So there is a happy medium, and probably a good policy would be to make sure that they've washed their hands if they came in from a playground or the backyard or even from school, and before they eat and after using the bathroom. But you don't really want to drive them crazy and drive them away from compliance.
I think you might have said this already, but what would you say like the safest way to like dry your hands? I know I read a report recently about like the new air blade dryers, how they like spread germs. So like, would you say that's true, or that's just propaganda from like, you know, major companies to perpetuation that?
Right. There was a little suspicion that the paper towel companies had something to do with it, and they did indeed run some of these studies. I discuss it in my book as well. The warm air dryers and the jet dryers, there are a couple of studies that show that they do broadcast the germs if there are germs in the vicinity, and they even spread them into the air. So there is some concern about that. And so paper towels are the recommended way, disposable paper towels are the recommended way to dry hands.
My question is, what's the safety use for sanitizers with children? Is there a certain age before you should start that?
Well, sanitizers, usually I leave it up to the parents. If they want the child to use the hand sanitizers, I mean, I've seen them in the schools, and the teachers have actually the children put on their own hand sanitizer all the time. I'm not aware if there is any specific age or limit on that.
I think the issue is more, you know, is the child, are they aware that they're not then supposed to put their hands near their mouth or in their mouth, you know, so it's a matter of determining if the child is mature enough to understand, you know, once you put that on, it's not to end up in your mouth.
Yes, thank you.
Any other questions? Well, I thank this wonderful audience and the wonderful panel, and thank you all for taking time out in a busy, busy week.